Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to start off by doing the reading from The Language of Letting Go, the meditation book on codependency. And I picked a reading from March 10th, Living with Families. We may love and care about our family very much. Family members may love and care about us, but interacting with some members may be a real trigger to our codependency. Sometimes to a deep abyss of shame, rage, anger, guilt, and helplessness. It can be difficult to achieve detachment on an emotional level. It can be difficult to separate their issues from ours. Difficult but not impossible. The first step is awareness and acceptance. Simple acknowledgement without guilt of our feelings and thoughts. We have to blame our family members. We have to blame or shame ourselves. Acceptance is the goal. Acceptance and freedom to choose what we want and need to do to take care of ourselves with each other. We can become free of the patterns of the past. We are recovering, and progress is the goal. Today, higher power helped me be patient with myself as I learned how to apply recovery behaviors with all my family members. Help me strive today for awareness and acceptance. Okay. I want to talk a lot today about one of my favorite topics, and it really is connected to codependency in adult children. And that topic is, what is normal? You know, there's an old saying, yes, Virginia, there is a normal. And our normal is for each and every one of us, wherever we are today. Normals are part of life. And yes, things are normal. When you were a child, you had a normal then. And as we go through the journey of life, our normals change. We change. The aspect of life changes. And so to truly be healthy, we have to be in constant process of changing, of growing, of learning. And as a result, then we have to realize the fact that many of our traits and our characteristics were developed in us in the first 10 years of our life. You know, I smile about this a lot of times, but by the time you're 10 years old, you're done. Simple and plain. All your traits, all your characteristics, your foundations have been set for you. The bottom line is simply this. I can live within that parameter, or I can move forward, learn from it, and grow from it. The secret of our history is so important, because I really believe that a person without a history doesn't exist. So your history is your most powerful teacher. I found it interesting to learn so many things in the course of my own journey in my own life. Because I was born in 1940. The first 10 years of my life were from 1940 to 1950. Believe it or not, when I was born, there wasn't even television yet. We had nothing but radio. Alana might not believe that, but it's true. We had nothing but radio back then. And the concept is, it's almost like I have seen the transition from 1940 up to 2023. I just can't believe how things have progressed and changed and developed and how so many normals have changed. But try to remember something. You can't go back. You got to move forward. So many of us have a tendency sometimes to want to go back to the past, to go back to where it was. And we can't. They're memories, they're part of our history. We can learn from them, grow from them, but the secret to life is to embrace them, face them, learn from them, and grow from them. That's why I've said this so many times, even when I wrote my book. Your history is your most powerful teacher. Everything in life functions from your history. And that's why it's so important for us to take time to go back and look at our history and look at the foundations of where we came from. And so today what I want to do to help us with this new normal is to be able to help us to be able to do what I call a family inventory. As I mentioned last week when I talked about codependency, and for those who weren't here last week, I define codependency as any person, place, or thing I have built a dependency on. It means I cannot function without it. That makes my life unmanageable and makes my life crazy. That can be a substance, can be a person, can be a family member, can be a lot of different things. The key is dependency and unmanageability. I also mentioned that there are 5 basic families we enter into at childbirth. Whether you want to join them or not, you end up joining them and then become part of your journey and part of your life. And so we learn traits, characteristics, and things from these different family members. They then teach us how to be able to embrace them, learn from them. I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of time in my life and wasted a lot of money on therapy, blaming my family, blaming my past, blaming things that happened. And I've learned today, blame doesn't work. The secret is to be able to embrace it, to learn from it. I really believe this. I truly believe that our family, whatever family we entered into, all these families, were there to teach us lessons, to learn from them and grow from them. I'll go through some of them now, but I'm going to kind of share some stories. I'm going to base them on my family history because I don't really know yours. But you have to go back and look at your own stories, your own connection to where you came from. Like I mentioned, I grew up in the 40s. And in the 40s, basically, I even smile about this today because I'm not even a baby boomer. I'm a war baby. This meant I was born before 1945. But the bottom line is, I grew up in a family where things were quite different than they are today. Both my parents were part of an arranged marriage. There aren't too many arranged marriages today. That thing has changed. I also was born, basically, into a family that had a history. My father came from the old country. My mother was born here, but her family came from the old country. And so we had a lot of Italian traditions and things I grew up with. But some of the things I learned as a child was be quiet, keep your mouth shut, don't speak unless you're talked to, and above all, don't have feelings. And as a result, I learned as a child some basic rules. Some of the rules were, if you're upset, go eat, you'll feel better. Now, I lived by that rule for a long period of time. And as a result, guess what? I am now in an eating disorder program. But the bottom line is, many of these traits, many of these characteristics were developed in me as a very young child. And it's amazing how little children can actually pick up these little statements, these things we experience, and they become part of us, part of our makeup. Even some family traditions and things that we did. For example, in my family, we had tons of traditions. You lived by those traditions. And if you did anything different from those traditions, they thought something was wrong with you. I love that play, has a thing, traditions in it, Fiddler on the Roof, the concept of traditions. What was a tradition at one time changes till today. Good example is the concept is, we look at years and years ago, women were not allowed to even go to school. Women had no rights. And basically that has changed a lot today, thank God. And so literally things constantly change in the course of our journey in life. And change is part of the process. I look at my family and we got some rules in my family. I kind of love sharing some of the rules. In our family, we grew up in an Italian ghetto in South Camden. And in our family, if you know much about Camden back in the 40s, Camden was divided up into sections. I could actually tell you which streets were the dividing lines. You had the Italian section in South Camden. You had the Irish section, which was also up towards Ferry Avenue and up that way. You had the German section. You had, which was down by Spruce Street and down the end. You had Pollock Town, the Polish section. You had the Black community. You had the Puerto Rican community. You had all these different communities. You had the Jewish community over in the Jewish Community Center area. So every area had its own place. Give you an example. As a kid growing up, we had a rule. You only hang around Italians. I think everybody else was unclean. And also, you only date Italians. To give you how strong some of those old traditions were, my cousin was the first one to violate the family tradition. He actually had the audacity to date an Irish girl. And then he married her. And tradition was so strong back then that his mother actually said, when he married this Irish girl, my son is dead. He doesn't exist anymore because he went outside the parameters. And as a result, people looked at life so differently than we look at it today. Even when it comes to the church, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we learned all these different concepts and things, even their outlook on life, on death, on different types of things. I'll share a funny story with you. It's not funny, but it's funny. I think we have lots of those in our life, if you go back. When I was in the seminary, when I was studying to become a priest, I used to come home in the summertime. I was home one summer, back when I was about, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, I'm sorry, about 13, 14, 15 years old. Anyway, my mother had this tradition that we had a man across the street, Senator Gale, who was in a wheelchair. My mother would go over and she would get his shopping list when she went shopping and do his shopping for him. So she went and did her thing. She came home, came in the house with her bags of groceries, was putting them away, and I said to her, how's Senegal doing? She said, he's dead. I said, well, what? He said, he's dead. I went over to get his shopping list and he was dead. I said, did you call the family? Oh, no, I'll get my shopping done first. I'll call him later. He said, why are you getting upset? She said, he was just as dead an hour from now as he is now. And, you know, that concept I could not really fathom. And yet they looked at life so differently. And you pick up these traits, these characteristics, they're part of it. And the amazing part about it is, I also learned other traits and characteristics from my family. Even Christmas traditions, different types of things. What I'm trying to get across is this. These were part of my makeup and part of my development as a child. And even to the point where literally, as I went through the journey of life, I learned how to create new families, to move in new directions, to work in other areas of life. I'd open myself up to change, but at the same time, every time you make these changes, you feel a certain amount of guilt, a certain amount of fear, a certain amount of anxiety, because I was taught the concept of control, guilt, and fear. The other family you grew up in, I mentioned part of that, was your neighborhood, your cultural family, your environment family. Again, some of those rules, those regulations I talked about. Even when it came to our religious family system with church. In Camden, you had a Catholic church for every neighborhood. And as a kid, I was never allowed to go into any church but the Italian Catholic Church. I was not allowed in the Irish Catholic Church or the African American Catholic Church. So literally, everyone was segregated, put together. So we're taught segregation, we're taught patterns, we're taught behaviors. And then many of us take them into our adult life if we don't have the energy and the strength to be able to become more open, to go through change, to go through directions to break some of the patterns. And many of the patterns of codependency, because you became dependent. I know as a child growing up, I became very dependent on my mother, very dependent on my family, which is normal, by the way. But in a way, it became too normal. My mother doted over me. I became my mother's spouse almost. And literally, then the family makes decisions for you. When I was 14 years old, my mother decided I was going to be the family priest because we had Italian traditions. They came from the old country. They had their customs with them. In Italy, they delegated one of the children to become the family clergyman. It was a great honor, prestige, and power to the family. Literally, you're looking at the delegated clergyman. I got delegated. I looked at that negatively. I was angry at my mother for a long period of time. But later on, as I grew and I was able to learn about life, I look back and I say, thank you, Mommy, for putting me away at 14. I know she didn't do it for this reason, probably put me there to keep me away from women, to keep me away from the girls, and basically to overprotect me. I even joke about it today. I said, she put me into protective custody. But the bottom line is, I'm glad she did because it forced me to break away from her and her control and actually to learn responsibility, to be able to grow up, to learn how to take care of myself, and how to grow up kind of quickly. And I see that positively today. I can do many things today I could not do back then. And so as you study your family, your blood family, you study religious family system. Growing up as a kid, how things change. I grew up in the Italian Catholic grammar school. Now, the nuns back then were a lot different because we grew up in fear and guilt. I still have scars. You know, I remember Sister Trisella in the 3rd grade. I keep my knuckles on the desk. If you get the answer right, no pain. If you get the answer wrong, that long stick cracked across your knuckles. I can still feel the pain today. I remember in the 5th grade, Sister pulling my hair out because I was a bad boy. And it's amazing sometimes the crazy things that went through. Many of the behaviors that went on back then, because we lived in fear and guilt, were basically what could be considered child abuse today. Back then, it was normal. That's what I mean about how normals change over the course of journey in life. And as a result, even as a child, I mentioned it earlier, I was baptized in the Catholic Church when I was 1 month old. My journey today has taken me in other directions. My spirituality has changed today. My connection to God has changed today. I go to the Episcopalian church now because I like the community in the church. I look for more of a sense of community today. I look for a place to belong. I can learn, I can grow. So I've learned something from being in 12-step programs. Take what you can use and leave the rest. And so these have an effect on you. But the big thing I want to bring across to everybody is you're allowed to change your normals. You're allowed to develop new normals. You're allowed to work in new directions. Doesn't mean you let go of the old. You acknowledge your history, you embrace it, but you got to be open to learn from it, to grow from it, and to be able to move and go through the process of constant change in new directions and learning new things and developing new normals. That's why I said, yes, Virginia, there is a normal. And so as we grow and mature, we can develop new normals for ourselves in our life. I can see the sense of family is different today I did back then. Today I have 3 families. I have my blood family. I love them and I embrace them. But again, I've learned something about my blood family. My blood family does not really understand me today because I violated a lot of rules. One was leaving the priesthood, and as a result, I was ostracized for a long period of time. But many of them have come around now, especially my cousins. But then basically, I realized today I can't discuss a lot of things I do today with many of my family members, so I accept them where they are. There's that acceptance thing again. I embrace them, but I go visit them and have a cup of coffee, and I do small talk. I don't talk about recovery, about my life and where it's at today. I talk about their bunions. I talk about their aches and pains, the things they've gone through, reminiscing on the old neighborhood, things that happened. It's called small talk. And we can experience that and be part of it. And I enjoy that. I have my wife's family, whom I love. They've adopted me. It's fantastic. And now they don't totally understand what I do, but they support what I do. And I'm connected with them. You know, my wife is a great connection to me today. So I've developed a new sense of family. From my wife, I picked up grandkids. I picked up a whole new way of life, a whole new direction in life. So things went through another process of change. Even that process change, sometimes you have to have a lot of patience, let things happen naturally, let growth take place naturally. And then, of course, there's my recovery family, one of the most important families I belong to, the family of recovery. Because without my recovery, the other families will fall apart. And so my recovery family is a big piece of my journey, part of my life. And I'm learning over and over again to develop new senses of family, to be connected. I belong to a community. I belong to different places. As a child growing up, I grew up in a peer family. And my peers were tough. As a little kid growing up, because I was kind of a mama's boy, I had some wonderful nicknames for my peers. One was Mommy's Boy, Little Mommy Boy. I also was called Church Mouse because my mother would take me to serve the 5:30 Mass every morning. And as a result, then, everything was centralized around the church. The kids would make fun of my body because I was heavy. I've always had kind of large breasts because of my weight. And a lot of times the kids would play games with me and call me different kinds of names. And it's amazing how these things affect you and they affect you in your life. Even today, when I go to the beach with my wife, I leave my shirt on a lot because sometimes I'm so embarrassed by my body. And that's part of my eating disorder program I have to deal with today. It takes me a long time to finally take that shirt off because basically the old tapes play inside of you. We all have old tapes. They're part of your journey. They're part of your life. They'll always be there. But the secret is not to run away from them, but to embrace them because we also have a history. Your history is part of who you are. I look back on my family, I learned a lot from them. And I can even joke about a lot of today. I can tell all kinds of stories today and everything, and I can have a lot of laughs about stuff today. My mom and my dad were total opposites. My dad was Mr. Wonderful, Mr. Fantastic, who did everything for everybody. He was too wonderful and too great. I picked up his traits and his characteristics. Everybody took advantage of my father. Everybody took advantage of me because I let them. Now I'm learning how to set boundaries. I'm learning how to deal with that. But it's one of my patterns. I got to be careful. So part of my codependency is I want to help everybody. You can't help everybody. I learned to help myself. And it's hard. I can carry a message. I can't carry people today. But believe me, for a long period of my life, I gave it a shot. I was even in a 12-step program myself, but I never did my work. I was too busy saving everybody else and fixing everybody else. And back in that day, we even fix you if you don't want to be fixed. We take you to treatment whether you want to go or not. I told stories about how we used to tie people up and bring them to treatment. I can't do that today. I'll go to jail. But the bottom line is, you learn different things, different techniques, and different directions. I remember when I was in my early years of learning to become an addictions counselor, we couldn't get people detoxed because there weren't any detoxes around back then. So we used the Ancora State Hospital. But there's a rule in Ancora. If you bring a person there for detox and you stay with them, they'll give them a shot of something and send them home. But if they're there by themselves, they have to keep them. So we would bring the guy who was drunk to the front door, lean him against the door, ring the doorbell, and go hide in the bushes. And then when they opened the door, he'd fall in. Then they had to keep him because nobody was with him. And they still couldn't figure out how he got there. And we're hiding. We called that treatment back then. But see, again, that changes too. We have hospitals today, emergency rooms, a lot of things change. And yet it's good. Change is good. But sometimes you have to realize you got to be able to go back into your history. And I've learned this over and over again. Your history is one of your greatest teachers. My mother's side of the family, a little bit different. They were a little connected. What can I tell you? We had some traditions back then too. See, a couple of my uncles used to run these. Well, one uncle ran a luncheonette, but there was no lunch meat in the luncheonette because in the back room there was numbers and there was horse racing and all kinds of stuff going on. I always loved telling the story of my uncle Johnny. He basically, the local police would warn him when they were coming to raid his place. And so basically, they would put everything away and be all set when they come, be real nice when the state police came. His son, who was 5 years old, was there when the police came in. The little boy yanked at his pants and said, "Daddy, I'll show the man where the stuff is." And the little 5-year-old took the state police back and showed them all the gambling equipment and everything. And his father had to spend 90 days in jail. That was a gift from his 5-year-old son. But the bottom line was, I can look back and tell these stories today, write about them today, and laugh about them today. But I'm sure my uncle wasn't, and my cousin wasn't too happy back then when his son did that. But that's okay. So you learn different things in different directions. Everything changes. Everything moves in new directions. You know, you look at things, neighborhoods. You know, we had the corner grocery store. We had the chicken man sold chickens. We had the guy that came down the street with ice cream, all kinds of crazy stuff. Today, things are more sophisticated. They're more fast food, stuff to that effect. Things change again. Are they better? In one way, yes. In other ways, no. Everything in life has a good point to it and a negative point to it. Even technology has negative and has positive to it. And we have more scams today and things of that effect. So you have to look at the fact that change is part of the journey of life. But there will be negative and positive in change. But yet we go back to our traits and our characteristics, and those patterns even come up today in my life. It's totally amazing. I'll be honest with you, the old stuff doesn't go away. Even to this day, I still realize the fact. My wife joked with me the other day. I was upset about something. First thing I did was open the refrigerator and stare at it. My mother used to say, "Go there and get something to eat." My wife said, "What are you doing, air conditioning the house?" She said, "What's bothering you?" As soon as I opened that door, she said to me, "What's bothering you?" That's a pattern. I picked that pattern up from childhood. I still carry it in my adulthood. I have triggers from my childhood. They come back in my adulthood. So you look at life as you go through change, you realize the fact you got to be open to it. And the hardest part about this is most of us fight change before we accept it. I mentioned before, I remember when, way back in the beginning with cell phones and, and computers, and from typewriters to computers to discs to, all this stuff that happens today. Pretty soon you'll have a TV set on your arm. You won't even have to go home to watch it. You can watch it in your car and everything else, what can I tell you? But it's amazing. Probably can do that already. But the bottom line is, you look at things in life and you realize the fact that want to change. And it's good to be able to go back and do an inventory of your own family. See, your family is your greatest teacher. There are patterns in your family. And whatever happened, even the most traumatic parts, we can learn from them, grow from them, and allow them to become our teacher, to look at them in a positive way. I have learned that from studying my history, and I'm going to be honest with you, I avoided it for a long period of time. I spent too much time being angry at my history. People say to me, are you angry and upset because you were a priest? I say, no. It's part of my life, part of my history, part of my journey. I'm grateful for that. I learned a lot. I'm grateful for every different aspect of the life I went through. Different people I've experienced, I've gone through in life. It's all part of our journey. And it all goes back to the foundations and the basics of those first 10 years. But things change. For example, my granddaughter was born in 1998. First 10 years of her life were from 1998 to 2008. Now, do you think she has a different perspective of life than I do? Of course she does. She experienced things I never experienced. In fact, I'll tell you a real funny story about change. When my first grandson got married in Montana, we went to the wedding. and he had a friend of his from college be the disc jockey. And so, they play all this music, bop 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 up and down. I don't know what the heck they were playing. It was crazy, man. Everybody's jumping around, having a good time and all that. And so I went up to the disc jockey and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "We have some old people here. Do you think maybe we could play a couple of slow songs, like maybe Sinatra or Dean Martin or something?" You know what he said to me? "Who's Sinatra?" I almost fell off the chair. He said, "Who are these people you're talking about?" Of course, the kid I was talking to was about 19, 20 years old. You know, he looked at me like I was, "What are you talking about?" You know, I was always afraid to ask him what slow music was to him. But the bottom line was, I look at that and I say, how can you not know that? And yet I realize it's true. A lot of times when I talk about my history, my grandkids look at me and say, "Papa, tell us some more stories from way back in the beginning of time." I says, "We're not going back that far. That's all right." But I know where they're coming from because they marvel at this stuff. "You mean to tell me you never had a TV set?" I said, "No. We had a radio." The other day I was talking to somebody and I said to them, and in fact, this Saturday I have to do a funeral for one of my classmates that died. And I have music I want to play at the funeral. It's on a CD. So I called the place where the funeral is going to take place and I said, "Do you have a CD recorder?" And the guy said, "A CD?" She said, "Wait a minute." She talked to "Do we have a CD player? What's a CD player?" And the guy said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Tell him to bring it. We'll play it through the computer." Okay. And it's like I was speaking a foreign language. Because today, what? Digital? Today, everything's downloaded. Things are different today. And so the concept is, I'm learning. I need to learn some more new stuff today. I have to develop some more new things. Loretta and Azzy and my receptionist, they come in here and they tell me about all those different types of stuff and everything else. And I sit there and say, "Sounds good." I haven't the slightest idea what they're talking about. What? Sounds good. What can I tell you? Go for it. But the bottom line is, I'm learning finally to be open. See, the key to developing new normals is to have an open mind, to be open to grow, to be open to change. Don't throw away the past, please. Your history and your past is your teacher. Even though many of us have gone through trauma, hurt, pain, and sometimes we even went through some pretty horrible stuff. But no matter what happened, I don't care what it is, there's always that good and that negative, positive and negative. I could always learn something. A lady called me up and said, "How can I go back and look at my childhood? I was severely abused as a child. What good was that and that and that?" I said, "Well, first of all, you have to accept the abuse. It's part of what happened to you. It's part of your history. Now, what can I learn positively from it?" A suggestion I made was, at least now you know what abuse is. You have the power not to allow anyone to abuse you anymore. You set new boundaries now. You protect yourself now. And so I'm learning over and over again. I can learn something powerful when I do the recovery process from codependency. I'll teach you how to be able to go back into your family of origin history, and how to be able to learn from it and grow from it, how to be able to experience new things from it. It's amazing. When I did this work, I learned so much about me and the foundation of life. Because I realize now, I really believe my parents were my first teachers. Were they the best of teachers? No, they were dysfunctional, like all parents are. And it's amazing, people come in for therapy, for instance, says, right away, they talk about their mom, they talk about their dad, talk about their history. Good, because we learn from that. And that's why there really is anything in life that's happened to you. Try to the best of it to heal, to forgive, to learn, to grow, to develop new normals, to move in a new direction. And every day you're alive on this earth, you'll have new normals. New things will happen. Things will change. And I hate to tell you this, you can't go back. History is history. What's so beautiful about history, though, if I can embrace it, if I can learn from it, if I can let it become my teacher, there's such powerful lessons to learn from it. I'll tell you a little story. When I was a kid, we had a tradition in our family. Many of you that live locally know about Calvary Cemetery in Pennsauken. Well, and it's actually Cherry Hill, and half the cemeteries in Pennsauken, half is in Cherry Hill. But anyway, we were kids. Every Sunday, we pack a picnic basket, go to Calvary Cemetery, and we take turns at our family's graves. We put the blanket on top of the grave, and we'd have a family picnic on top of the grave. All of our family outings were done at the cemetery. That was an old Italian tradition that came from Italy. Now, I really don't enjoy going to cemeteries for picnics today, but the bottom line is it was a sense of family back then. And you want to include the family in it. And so you got to go to Uncle Joe's grave. You got to go to everybody's, they take turns. It was part of the tradition of family. Do I do that today? No. I've learned new things today, new directions today. We do, whoever heard of cremation, now we have cremation. Whoever heard of an electrical car, now we have an electrical car. It's amazing, you look back on this. My father fought in the First World War in the Italian cavalry, back in the days when they still charged each other with open swords and stuff, and he survived it. Well, warfare has changed. Everything in life has changed. Nothing stays the same. And by the way, it's not supposed to. Does that mean it's all good? No. It's got a mixture of good and bad in it. It's got a mixture of positive and negative in it. I can use technology positively, I can use it negatively. I can use everything in life that way. So just take some time. Go through your own family history. In fact, I recommend, the best thing I ever did in my life was I wrote a book called My Spiritual Journey. It was the history of my childhood, history of my family. I went back and looked at that and put it on paper, and I realized, wow, look how lucky I was. I had some crazy people in my life. Even the nuns were nuts. And some of the priests were a little nuts too. But I've learned from them, I've grown from them. I've learned that they're human beings just like me. I've learned to forgive, I've learned to heal. I've learned to move on. See, I can spend the rest of my life being miserable and being angry. Even when it comes in life, we go through so many different things in life. Be able to be open and learn from them. So yes, Virginia, there is a normal. And so our normal is wherever we are today, but go back into your history and learn from your past and grow from it. Now, next week in this series, what I want to concentrate on is how to play and how to have fun. The reason I do this lecture next week is because adult children of alcoholics and codependents, we take life very, 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 very seriously. We analyze everything, try to figure everything out. We actually have brain freeze, make ourselves nuts. We even try to figure out things that can't be figured out. Keep trying to figure out life, it's not going to work. There will always be some sort of mistakes and things we're going to go through. Come on. So let's play and have some fun. So we'll learn to be kids next week. If you have any memorabilia from your childhood, I recommend get a hold of it. If you have a stuffed animal that you connect to as a child, anything that'll bring back a memory of you as a child. Also, I recommend finding a photograph of yourself as a little girl or a little boy. and be able to connect. I'll give you some techniques to work with that next week. It's good to be able to go back and let that child inside of you, and there is a little child inside of each and every one of us, and that little child is your most powerful teacher. You gotta get in touch with it. I know home, when I cleaned my mom's house, I found some wonderful things. I found my toe tag when I was born as a baby. See, in 1940, they actually, like they do now in the morgue, they put a toe tag on you, which are the dimensions and everything else, and also my little blanket. So my wife actually had a doll made for me, my information on it, and made it out of the material from the blanket. It's sitting right next to me right here. I'll show it to you next week. But the bottom line is, all these memories. She also kept my little booties when I was a little baby. And the one side was worn out, I guess, the way I walked. And so my wife had them, what do you call it? You put them on a stand, and there's a name for it. I forget what it is, but anyway. So basically, I have those, my little mementos. But it's so beautiful to have stuff from your past that connects you. Photographs of you as a little child, things that happened in life. Remember when I was a little kid, maybe, I don't know, 4 years old with the Italian derby on. You know, it's just interesting to see all this kind of stuff. So history can bring you a smile, can bring you a pain, can bring you a struggle, can bring you a joy. Be open to it. So my prayer today is that we all have the strength and courage to go back into our family history, to learn from it, to grow from it, and be open to it. And allow yourself to realize the fact that everything in life is a teachable moment. We just try to be open to it and learn from it and grow from it. So let us pray. God, we come before you as a family in prayer. We come here in gratitude. We ask the God of our understanding, our higher presence, to guide us and be with us as we walk the journey of this earth. Teach us to look at our history and our past with an open mind. Teach us to be able to realize and learn from our past, to learn and grow. Teach us not to be afraid of change, to move in new directions. To teach us to embrace the past and honor it, to learn from it, to grow from it. To be able to live in the present and celebrate the present. For tomorrow, the present will be our past. Teach us to continue the journey of learning. And please teach us never to be done. This process goes on as we continue to learn about life and celebrate life. And so we ask our higher power to walk with us, to guide us and strengthen us as we walk the journey. We ask God of our understanding to help us and be with us, and all will be well. So we pray and we ask for this grace and this strength. We pray for it in your name. Amen.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.